we have a good set of our participants already with us. My name is Betty Hayford, and I'm happy to welcome you to this discussion sponsored by the League of Women Voters and by Wise Up with Mary and Larry Gavin, the founders and the longtime publishers of the Evanston Roundtable. I'm the current vice president of the League of Women Voters, and I want to introduce you to our speakers and get the program in process, but I do have a few announcements of future League events. So I hope you'll bear with me, and I hope you will join us for these events. Next week, the League is sponsoring a Drinks and Dialogue on Wednesday evening at 5 o'clock, October 27th. This will be a presentation and a discussion on the topic of carbon pricing, which couldn't be more timely. And after we attend that discussion, we can all send a message to President Biden and Joe Manchin about our opinions on that subject. On the next Saturday, on October 30th, at 11 a.m., there's going to be a dedication of a historic marker in McCullough Park. This is a marker in recognition of Catherine Waugh McCullough, who is a very distinguished Evanston political activist at the end of the 19th and into the 20th century. And of course, a suffragist and a professional, an active professional woman at a time when that wasn't so common. So she's being recognized in a dedication of this marker and the park that is named after her at 1700 Livingston. And it's a wonderful event, and I encourage everyone to attend. One more item I'll mention is in November, on Tuesday, November 11th at noon, we're going to have a presentation about the very significant criminal justice reform bill that the Illinois legislature passed last February, and which is in the process of being implemented by Sarah Stout, an Appleseed activist. So I encourage you to keep your eyes open for that, and to keep your eyes open, always looking at the League of Women Voters e-blasts, and keep track of our events if you can, because they're often very interesting. I guess I should mention, and maybe you all can see this, that this meeting is being recorded, and you can review it, or you can tell your friends about it and they can review it, and you can go to the website of the League of Women Voters or the website of Wise Up to get the link for it. So our program tonight, as you know, is a discussion with Mary and Larry Gavin about their long and very distinguished career with the Evanston Roundtable. And they will describe some of the important issues that they confronted, both organizational and also journalistic. So we're all looking forward to hearing what they have to say. The conversation will be moderated by Helen Gagel, an active member of the League of Women Voters and also of Wise Up. Helen is a very experienced moderator, as well as a community leader in many respects. So we're happy to have her participating in this event. So some of the people registered for the meeting have already sent in questions that we will get to if we have time. And if you have other questions, if other questions come to mind while Mary and Larry are speaking, please put them into chat, and we will have a chance to ask them to our speakers if we have time. But we promised our speakers that this probably wouldn't go more than an hour and a half. So with that, let me turn the meeting over to Helen Gagel, our moderator. And we all look forward to hearing from Helen and from the Gavins, of course. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Betty, and welcome everyone. I think I'm supposed to give a little commercial for Wise Up here, which I will do. For those of you who aren't familiar with Wise Up, we're an organization of older adults who help one another live purposeful lives as we age, and we provide support and connections to one another with the idea that we can continue to contribute to our community as we go forward. I'm looking at the view here. Someone is screen sharing. I'm not quite sure why, but I'm going to move this over so I can see everyone.
Yes. I was going to interrupt a second, Helen, and ask Mr. Wittenberg if you would please stop sharing your screen.
Thank you. Okay, we have an awful lot we could try to cover tonight. We won't cover everything we want to cover, but just some introductory comments. Behind me, you see a decal that says support local journalism. It's a car magnet that arrived quite timely in my mail just yesterday, and I guess it's being sent to people who are members of the Evanston Roundtable and supporting the Roundtable as a community not-for-profit organization. So if you are not already among those members and would like to get one of these decals, I would encourage you to go to the Roundtable website and sign up. That decal and the existence of the Roundtable is a major reason why Evanston is not yet in the category that has risen in the last 5 to 10 years of discussion, a news desert. I'm sure many of you have heard that term. University of North Carolina School of Journalism has done a lot of work in this arena, a lot of research, and they publish a yearly report on news deserts. Some of it quite depressing. Some of it, when they write about or study about some of the community-based news organizations that are developing, is encouraging. But just a few numbers that I want to go through quickly. Since 2004, the United States has lost 1/4, that's 2,100 of its newspapers. This includes 70 dailies and more than 2,000 weeklies or non-dailies. And we're talking about print journalism here. At the end of 2019, we had 6,700 newspapers, which was down from almost 9,000 in 2004. More than 200 of the counties and equivalents have no newspaper and no alternative source of credible and comprehensive information. Half of the counties in this country have only one newspaper, and 2/3 of them do not have a daily newspaper. And many of the communities that lost newspapers were the most vulnerable, economically struggling and isolated. So picture a little town somewhere in, I don't know, the Dakotas or Arkansas or Oklahoma, where they not only no longer have a print newspaper, they probably don't have very reliable internet access. So that's a major cause for concern. A former editor and columnist for the Democrat Gazette in Little Rock, Arkansas, was mourning the loss of one of the small papers in that state, and I quote him here, or her, I'm not sure it's a man or a woman. "The watchdogs of school boards, city councils, and courts are gone. The chroniclers of high school sports teams are missing. To say that this is a sad thing for these counties is to understate the case. For more than 2 centuries, newspaper editors and reporters," by the way, they've lost thousands of reporters, "more often than not, served as arbiters of our news, determining what made front page headlines read by millions of people in this country. They were the prime, if not the sole source of credible and comprehensive news and information, especially for residents in small and mid-sized communities. So Evanston, as I said earlier, is not yet a news desert. We not only have the Roundtable, we have the Daily Northwestern, we have Evanston Now, we have Patch. So we have several sources of local news coverage. So we're kind of here tonight to celebrate two of the people who have held off the desert situation in Evanston and who have played an outsized role in hopefully ensuring that we won't become one. So I'm pleased to introduce Mary Gavin and Larry Gavin, who are our resources tonight. I've divided the topic into three kind of mega areas. The first being the business of newspapering, the second being the practice of journalism, and the third being observations and concerns about our community, the community of Evanston, during the 23 years that they have been a watchdog in the community. So I'd like to ask Mary first, because I consider her the founding mother. It's my recollection that Mary founded the Roundtable and Larry joined in. If I'm incorrect in that, you can correct me. But Mary, what was your inspiration for doing something that many people would consider just about the most daunting and challenging enterprise anybody could get into?
Thank you for inviting us, and thank you to Wise Up and the League for hosting this. In a sense, you do need a little bit of a correction there, because Larry was one of the founders as well, but he was still practicing law. So he was pretty much working nights and weekends. And then after he retired, he became more visible. But to answer your question, we lived here about 20 years and sent our kids to public schools. We'd been on boards and commissions, scouts, PTA. So we thought we knew the community pretty well. And we did not think that the local newspaper was really giving a fair picture of Evanston. We didn't think it was reporting on how rich this community is in cultural and educational and other resources. So as you mentioned, it was daunting, but we were foolhardy enough not to realize that so much and thought we would jump in. Go ahead, Larry.
I think one thing that influenced me was I served on the District 65 Long-Term Planning Commission in the early 1990s for 18 months. And we issued a report in 1993. The committee was comprised of 15 white people, about 15 Black people. And in our report, we recommended a long-term plan to continue desegregating the schools in Evanston. And we also recommended a plan to tackle the achievement gap over a 10-year period and laid out various strategies on it. And when we presented our plan to the board, they discussed it, but essentially shelved it. And I thought that was pretty disappointing. And when Mary really proposed starting the local paper, I saw it as an opportunity really to shine a light on District 65 and to encourage them to address the achievement gap and to keep that in the public forefront. And that was one of the key motivating factors that I had in starting it up.
And I think we've all read your in-depth reports on school board meetings. Wow, what a fine job you're doing of covering. Later, I might ask you how you feel, 20 years later about that long-term report and what progress they've made since. Starting any kind of business, much less one in the precarious arena of journalism and newspapering, is daunting. What kinds of resources, financial and human, did you bring to the fore to get this thing launched. And it was, for those of you who aren't familiar, it was a bi-weekly print newspaper when it began, the Roundtable.
I can start out answering that. We started with 7 people, I guess, Mary, me, Al Manning, Al Worley, Kathy Ade, Peggy Tarr, and Charles Wilkinson. And of those, only one had journalistic experience, and that was Al Manning, who covered news down in Springfield. He was the PR person for an attorney general at the time, too. We quickly added Victoria Scott and Beth Demas to the crew. And I think over the next, I'd say 5 years, we built up more journalists until we had close to 20 to 25 writing for every paper issue that we had. And as Helen indicated, we came out twice a week. We had 18,000 circulation from the start. Everyone really worked for what I'd call a token amount, almost quasi-volunteers, because we didn't have the money really, and people were willing to write because they loved Evanston. The paper was a free paper, so we had no subscriptions, no subscription income. We depended totally on ads, and it took almost 3 years before we broke even with our ads revenues matching our expenses, even though our expenses were still really cut down to the bone and everyone was working for a minimal amount. But from then on, we distributed 18,000 copies to every single family home in Evanston. We had 3,000 available for pickup at about 50 locations throughout Evanston. And then I guess we were able to do that until about November of 2019.
When did you start asking your readers to support the paper through either subscription or, I know you were not a not-for-profit when you began, but I believe you did at least request subscriptions?
Yes, we asked after we converted to solely online in November of 2019. We asked people to make a contribution online if it was purely voluntary. We didn't have a paywall. So they could donate whatever amount they decided, $5, $10, $50. And it was on a purely voluntary basis. And we wanted to keep it that way so everyone would have access to the paper. It was important to us to have a free paper accessible to everybody. And that really was not sustainable as well. And we all ultimately thought the only way to continue to survive was to convert the paper to a not-for-profit, which other papers had done, started to do throughout the nation. We consulted with the publisher at the Wednesday Journal in Oak Park, who we had worked with. We had consulted in starting up the print edition some 20 years before, and he was converting 4 newspapers to a nonprofit status in Oak Park, Austin, and some of the western suburbs. And we did that with the hope that it would put us in a better position to seek contributions through memberships such as Channel 11, from just donations from foundations and other folks, and also to continue to solicit ads. And we also did it because Mary and I at the time were over 70 years old and we're looking for someone who could continue it on, continue the leadership. So the nonprofit structure provided a way to do that. We organized the nonprofit in April of 2000 and obtained 501c3 status that December. And our vision at the time was to build up a sort of a structure for the nonprofit, to get an advisory board. We had a board, and to transfer leadership on June 30th, 2021. And we did that. And Tracy Kutraki took over on June 30th with a team of people that she's put together that includes Karen Larkin, Evan Gerard, and Mark Miller as some of the key people working on the editorial function. And according to plan, they have, me and Mary resigned from the board. They appointed 2 new people to diversify the board and to take a step toward that. And Tracy has been successful in recruiting some Black journalists to also diversify our journalistic staff. So I think it's moving pretty well. It's difficult. Any transition is difficult, but
Sure.
I think this is going as smooth as possible.
Well, yeah, I've been, and I would encourage everyone, if you haven't been to the Roundtable website recently, to take a look and look at the rather long list of the advisory board and a shorter list of the board of directors. And I think it's quite representative of the brain power and people power in Evanston. And I think it bodes well for the future. I would also say that I salute you for not making the mistake that so many startups make and not having a succession plan. You obviously created one, and I think it's going to stand the organization and the community in good stead going forward. Mary, when you started, the 2 of you started this, what did you not know that you wish you'd known?
Well, almost everything. There was so much we didn't know. As Larry pointed out, there was only one person with journalism experience. And as he also mentioned, Dan Haley of the Wednesday Journal was so helpful. He has been very generous in his advice, but we weren't sure about really how to standardize things, what you call elected officials. But some of the things that we really didn't know that just kind of dawned on us as we went through this was that there are a lot of opinions in Evanston. And I think everybody's heard that thing about put up 5 Evanstonians in a room and you get 8 opinions. So that became clearer. And then I think another thing that I thought was pretty interesting, and you league members probably already know it, most decisions, while they're discussed and voted on at the main meeting, city council or board, most of these things are really discussed in the committees, the finance committees or curriculum committees at school boards, or the administration and public works committee and planning and development committee, zoning committees that happen much before the meeting.
Mhm.
So we learned those things. And there were probably a lot more things that I've forgotten that I didn't know, but that's an example.
Sometimes ignorance is bliss, or you wouldn't even start it, you know?
Yeah.
That leads me into another arena, and that would be some of the challenges and the discomfort of covering the news in your hometown where you've lived for a long time. My summer job for 3 summers when I was a student at Medill here in Northwestern, I worked for my hometown paper back in Ohio. And it was that experience that showed me that I couldn't really be a news reporter because it was too hard for me personally to ask some of the hard questions of people I'd grown up with and knew well, et cetera, et cetera. So it turned me on a different path, which was fine. But what kinds of things do you run into in what's really a small town, Evanston in so many ways, when you're out there as the third estate or the fourth estate, trying to do a credible job of covering the news, and sooner or later, you're gonna make somebody mad.
Yes, that's true. And that is one of the challenges. So the way as I thought, there were about 4 challenges that we had to meet. One is, of course, accuracy and fairness. And one is realizing that probably somebody you wrote about is going to be next to you in a line at the grocery store or something like that. So you have to be really prepared to defend what you said. So a lot of it is just preparation and making sure that things are accurate and making sure that what you wrote is defendable. So that when you do, and you, as you pointed out, Helen, you meet people on a much more personal level because Evanston is a small town. So you have to be prepared for that. Another thing that we did, and I supervised a lot of interns over the years and enjoyed that very much. But I would say to them, even if you know this person, if this is your Girl Scout leader, you still call them by the title. Keep that professional distance. And I think that that sort of thing helps, because I think most people understood that, yes, maybe our sons played Little League together, but now you're the mayor and I'm the reporter. So this is how we're going to treat each other. So I think that that helped. And then another thing that it's not so much fun, but addressing complaints and admitting mistakes. No one likes to be called on make a mistake. And sometimes people would be more angry over the littler things, well, not littler, but things that seem to us more correctable. You know, we had an address wrong, or we misspelled someone's last name, but we took every complaint very seriously. So people would know that we're not trying to play with this community. We're really trying to help everyone get a picture of it. And when we had mistakes that we had to admit, we put a clarification or a correction in the paper or online. So I think that, it was a way that I was hoping we would be building up trust in the community. And I think every newspaper has all these standards, but as you pointed out, when it's in your hometown, sometimes it can feel a little strange. But you do have to ask the hard questions, and sometimes people are glad to have them asked.
Mhm. Larry, you must have run into some of this covering the schools, particularly as someone who had been involved in a major endeavor to introduce or initiate change in District 65. Have you had some tough moments in your school board coverage?
I have, I guess as Mary said, you're really living in the community where you're reporting, and it creates some issues because you run into the same people over and over again. You run into friends of the people, and it becomes difficult in some ways. I think the first year we were in existence, we gave editorials supporting different candidates on the school board. And after the election, some of the people we supported, most of them actually lost, so it didn't matter. But nonetheless, some people that we supported, were upset with us. And I think what we learned from that experience was that it's going to be very difficult to go back to a school board meeting and cover that meeting if you took a position on a candidate favorably or unfavorably. And it's, I guess after that, we stopped endorsing candidates just because of because we were all, the ones who were forming the endorsement, and then we were also the ones deciding whether, the ones covering the school board or the city council meetings. Mm-hmm. Those really they have to be separate functions, I think, if you're going to do
I'm
that.
I'm glad you mentioned that, Larry, because it was one of the things I wanted to explore with you, because the roundtable does not have a regular practice of endorsing candidates, although you do, have opinion pieces. And that line of demarcation between the newsroom and the opinion side has to be, as you said, very, very strict. But in a small organization, that's hard, because you're the Jack and Jane of all trades. You're the editors, you're also the reporters. So talk a little bit more about are there times when you wish you could write a scathing editorial about someone you're covering, but you decide not to do it?
Absolutely. but
we used to say that would be our Viking funeral. We used to say everything we really wanted to say and go down in flames. Go ahead, Larry, sorry.
Well, but I think our approach has generally been not to make ad hominem attacks on people. You know, we editorial, even when we do editorials, I think we've tried to stick to issues and not attack people. We try to respect their views and challenge the views if we think they're wrong. So I think our approach is generally to stay away from attacking, you know, people based on personalities. But it's, I guess some other things
An
that
editorial endorsement of a candidate doesn't have to be an attack on the other candidate.
it doesn't, but you know, it's
It can be interpreted as such.
yeah. But it, you know, if they're friends, sometimes they were friends, and you know, it puts you in a very awkward position to go back and cover the same meeting, to call them up for a
Exactly.
quote. I mean, it's becomes awkward.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Have you
One
lost
thing-
any friends through the years? You don't have to mention names.
I don't think so, really. I think we've tried to be fair to people on the whole. I mean, as a practice, try to be objective and fair. And I think oftentimes, even if we're report something that, you know, they don't like, I think most people have respected that we've tried to be fair about it.
Can I add something there? Oh,
Sure,
sorry.
Mary.
Yeah, go ahead.
Once in a while, we would have an editorial that did attack, disagree with the city position or something like that. And we would generally call, like it was the city manager or the mayor or the police chief or something, and say, this is what's going to be on our paper tomorrow, or this is what's already up online. We wouldn't necessarily say, we're going to change it if you don't like it, but just kind of a heads up. This is what you're going to be hearing about tomorrow.
Mhm. And did anyone ever try to talk you out of printing it?
I think there was one time that somebody objected to a sentence. So I went back to read the sentence, and I can't remember whether I changed it or not, but generally, no. No, I think that they kind of understood that this is what we were saying, and this is, you know, people generally played pretty fair most of the time.
I mean, 23 years, that's a long run. Think about what stories, what coverage are you really proud of in your stewardship of the roundtable?
I would, I guess, point to the series on student achievement that I did about 10 years ago. It was a time when District 65 was reporting that Black students, about 85% of Black students were meeting standards on the Illinois Standard Achievement Test in 8th grade. And then that same class 3 years later, in 11th grade, ETHS was reporting only 35% were meeting standards on the PSAEs, which was the state test given to high school kids. So it was a drop from 85% meeting standards in 8th grade to about 35% in 11th grade at ETHS. And the districts were pointing the finger at each other, who's at fault and what's going on. 65 said that they were sending kids over well prepared, and ETHS was failing them, and ETHS was saying that the tests are different. I contacted Paul Zawitkowski at the University of Illinois, and who was an assessment specialist, and asked him to help out. And he did a study for us that showed that on a statewide basis and a district-wide basis, the ISATs were set at about the 20th national percentile, the meet proficiency benchmarks were. And that at that percentile rank, they're about 2.5 grade levels below grade level. So an 8th grader is performing at the level of a 5th grader in order to meet standards. And we published a series of articles on that in about, I think it was 2012 or so, and argued that the districts needed to raise standards, raise expectations for kids to a point where they would be performing at a skill level that would be meaningful to their having an opportunity in life. And I worked with Tracy Kotraki, who was on the board at the time, Katie Bailey, Keith Terry, who were on the board, helped spearhead the effort to raise expectations for kids. And School District 65, after almost a year's time of looking at this issue, and I think badgering by me, by Tracy, by Katie Bailey, Keith Terry, finally agreed to raise the standards to well above the 20th percentile, but to about the 60th percentile, which was where they needed to be on track to college readiness. And 65 was the first district in the state to do this. And it took probably 2 years, but the Illinois State Board of Education acknowledged about 2 years later that the ISATs were set extremely low, that they were basically failing kids by setting them so low. And they too raised the expectations to college readiness. But I think this was probably just one of the most significant things that any board has done to raise expectations for kids. And if you want to talk about equity, I think that was probably the most, it was the driving force in providing equity to kids.
And reflecting now, after almost 2 years of distance learning or remote learning, how do you feel particularly in 65, how do you feel that they are doing from your observation?
Well, it's hard to tell. They haven't issued any test reports or test results. So it's hard to tell how they are doing academically. They have given tests on the MAP test in the winter. I've got copies of those, but they say they refuse to give me the normative results on those. They've given the tests in the spring. So they have been given tests to kids, and yet they have not published them or published them in a fashion that's usable. So it's really impossible to tell how kids are doing, which is, one complaint I have and concern I have. As far as, just telling how they're doing through remote learning, it's obviously a very difficult time for teachers, for administrators. I think everyone pitched together and did as well as they could. We took care of our grandkids oftentimes during the period. One is in kindergarten, and we monitored him. It was just a very difficult time. And we've heard, I don't want to be overly critical about what happened in that time, because it was a unusual, difficult time.
Yeah.
But I think our grandchild, did as well as could be expected. I think I've heard reports from, a lot of other parents that they were favorably impressed. I think the main complaint is that a lot of people wish they opened the school sooner.
Yeah. I'll remind people, if you something occurs to you that you would like to ask, please put your question into the chat, and Betty Hayford will keep an eye out for it. Mary, what stands out in your memory of stories, coverage that you've done or that you've led through these past 2+ decades that you take great pride in?
I didn't really have a beat the way a lot of people did. And I do think Larry made our reputation with his reporting on education. There were some stories that I did enjoy writing, but I think what I'm most proud of is some of the stories that our interns wrote. I've enjoyed supervising the interns, and many of them were from ETHS, and they've gone on to do really lovely things, really important things. But one about 8 or 10 years ago, we had probably too many interns, but I asked them to do a group project on restorative justice in Evanston. And I think that was about 2012, when it was just really beginning. And Kurt's Cafe kept that series of articles on their website for 5 or 6 years. So I thought that was pretty cool. And this past summer, a group, three of them wrote a story about how the library here and the public school librarians handle banned books or requests to ban books, what they do. And I thought that was really cool. And then another intern we had this summer wrote a wonderful piece on environmental justice in the Ninth Ward, which has usually been pretty ignored. So I think that my pride is in a lot of the accomplishments of our interns.
Oh, and what a wonderful nurturing job you've done for them, particularly with kids. Have any of them gone on to become reporters full-time or stay in journalism?
Yes, as a matter of fact, several of them have. They've working for the New York Daily News and Bloomberg, the Cubs, Patch. Where else, Larry? Cranes. Oh, and one of them, did you love this, is an anchor for Fox News in Florida.
Do his Evanston parents allow him to come home?
I think once in a while she gives a shout out to Chicago, so it's nice.
That's great. That's great. On the other hand, I mean, obviously lots of coverage, particularly when you were publishing twice a week. I think I misspoke. I said bi-weekly. I should have said semi-weekly, or whatever. I always get those mixed up. What do you wish, or did you wish you had more time or space to cover in the paper?
Well, I'll start with that. A lot of things, but I wish that we'd had more time to cover more youth events and a more thorough coverage of the Latinx community. We did what we could, but we relied an awful lot on people sending in information about their organizations and about what their kids had done and what the scouts, what the PTAs, what the sports team had done. And we're very grateful for those, but those were things that came to us that we were not able to do. And then I think another thing, I wish we had a little more humor. Every April, we did an April Fool edition, and a lot of them were pretty popular. They got to the point where people believed some of them. The first one that Sean Jones did was about how people were going to have to pay to have their streets plowed. And he had an elaborate scheme that if you didn't buy a sticker, then the snowplow would come and raise the plow and not plow your street. And then if the snow was 3 feet deep, it'd be this. And that even went international. People thought it was true. And then the next year, he had a thing about how one of the beaches was going to be given only to Trader Joe's employees. And that the city manager called me from Springfield and said, please put something on your website that this is a joke because we are getting overrun. And even after a year or two afterward, when somebody put something about Lee Street Beach, they just put not Trader Joe's. And that was a city employee. And the city manager, former city manager, calls me every April 1st now and says, what are you doing? So I think it'd be nice if there was a little bit more levity. So Larry, you have something probably more serious.
No, I think one thing when we started out, we had hoped to give more, I don't know, if you want to call it fun coverage to the schools and be able to cover what teachers were doing in their classrooms that was new or unusual, that was helping kids. And, a lot of that is going on in the schools, and we just never had the resources, the journalists to cover it. We did reach out at times to have parents do it, and sometimes they would do it for a period of time, a short period of time, and then, it would fade out. But that's, one thing that we had hoped for and didn't pan out.
Mm-hmm. When people, fact checking is a very important part of publishing a newspaper, and when you get submissions from a publicist or the president of an organization or Betty Hayford from the League of Women Voters wants you to put something in about an upcoming meeting or whatever, how much time do you have to do any fact checking to make sure that what is being brought to you from another source is accurate and reliable?
Well, when we were in the print edition only, since it was only every other week, we had pretty much time to check that out. Then when we started our website in 2009, there was a little bit less time because we tried to put those things up right away. If it came from a trusted source, an Evanston organization that we knew, such as the League of Women Voters, we really didn't check anything. Once in a while, somebody would notice that there was maybe an address that seemed real wrong or some misspelled thing. So we would call and say, did you really mean to say this, or did you really mean to say that? If they were from places that we really didn't know anything about, or from a PR firm, we would be a lot more careful. So I guess the answer is probably an hour or less to how much time we had.
What kind of pressure, if any, have you gotten from major advertisers who might be unhappy with something you've written or published? Or have you had any?
Not really. Once in a while, somebody would say, this is a really important story and we advertise with you. But if it came through the salespersons, we'd say to the salesperson, that's not what they're paying for. They're renting space in our paper, or they're renting space on our website. And then we'd look, if it was something that would affect the entire community or be something good, then we would put it in regardless of whether the group advertised with us or not. And we really didn't have that kind of pressure, maybe because we just didn't do it from the beginning. So would you agree with that, Larry? I don't remember any pressure, really.
I think on the whole, I think we separated really the editorial function from the advertising. So we never promised to we always refused to put an article in for an advertiser in exchange for their business. And we're, stuck with that pretty much. We totally. I think early on, we suspected that we lost some or didn't gain some advertising from certain businesses because we distributed the paper to every location in Evanston, to Black areas, and to low income areas. And we felt that they didn't want to get business from those groups.
Really?
It was never said directly, but that was what we believed, I guess.
It was hinted at by some of the salespeople that had received hints like that.
Really? Oh, it's disappointing. Shifting from print to online, which is a phenomenon that every print publication in the country, if not the world, is dealing with, some more successfully than others. I mean, if everyone had those of you who do have, who are on video, raise your hand if you read a daily newspaper in print still. Who reads a daily newspaper in print? Some of us, not very many. Who reads a daily newspaper, one or more, online? So there's still, I think we're probably unusual. But making that, what kinds of decisions did you have to make in terms of what you could or could not publish? Or how does the business of newspapering change when you shift from print to digital? And what did you have to learn?
You want to go first, Larry?
Oh, go ahead.
Well, in a way, it was a little more freeing because when we had the print edition would be as long as we could afford to make it. So sometimes it was 24 pages and sometimes it was 36 pages. So there was a lot of stuff that we really couldn't put in. But with an online paper, you can put almost everybody's announcement. You have to edit it, of course, but you can put up every single thing the library's doing, and things like that. So in that sense, it was more freeing. As far as figuring out how in a small website you can get the stories, the play that they need, and then what's going to stay the next day when you got another story, So I think those are the kinds of tensions that probably we dealt with, and I'm sure that the present people are too. What do you think, Larry?
I think the time pressures are different from going online where you're expected to have news out daily. And from our style of print, which was every 2 weeks, when we came out every 2 weeks, there was a luxury of doing an article and having it sit for 2 days or 3 days and proofing it or changing it, improving it, whatever. But, if it's online, then I think the readers expect it to be up there the next day at least. So the time pressures are much different. And there's, I think for some of the editors in charge, there's, very little time off. It's a constant.
Yeah, 24 hours.
Yeah.
Do you have a sense of your readership? Has it grown? I know there's some very sophisticated ways that the big organizations can track who's opening what, how much time they're spending on the page, and so forth. I rather doubt that you have the capability of doing that as a smaller organization. But what's your sense of how readership has grown, shrunk, stayed static since you went to online?
We do have Google Analytics, so we'd have very good reporting on the number of readers we have, and we have actually data showing the number of readers per day that go to our site, the number of views, which is it includes multiple visits, I suppose. Unique visitors would be just the number of unique visitors per day. And we have it for any period of time that we wanted to put in, weekly, every 2 weeks, month, a year. And it also will give us the number of people who opened up an article. So we can tell how many people have clicked on any article on a given day. And again, we can call up that data by any period of time we want. So we get pretty good data. I think the current number of unique visitors per month is about close to 48,000, is the last in September. And I don't know what the number of visits is in that time, but it's been going up, and the number of people going to our newsletter has been going up. I think that's almost doubled since we changed to the online paper. So it's been growing steadily, I'd say.
So a unique visitor is one person logging on one time, and if that person comes back, it's a repeat. Or
it's not. If you have say I went on to the roundtable, I'd be the unique visitor. And if I went back, so in that given day, I'd be a unique visitor. Okay. But if over a month, say I went to the paper 20 times, I would be still only one unique visitor would check. But I would be, they would have 20 views for me. So one unique visitor, 20 views. So they track it differently in that way.
So you said 48,000 unique visitors in a month?
In September, yeah.
How many of those unique visitors are members?
I would imagine, I would guess most of them are. I don't know. Well, I mean, most members are unique visitors, I should say. So we have about, I think, 2,500 members. So maybe 10%, not even 10%, it's is that 5% of unique visitors. So 5% of the people are members who come to our site every month.
And if someone on this call is not yet a member, all they need to go to your website and click on what, I'm trying to remember what it is. Join us, become a member. It's
That's right.
really easy to do, people, if you haven't done it yet.
Thank
And then
you.
you'll get this decal
Yeah.
for your
Thank you.
car.
And it's, it's still free. And I guess by becoming a member, they get just sign up to get the newsletter. So that's,
Yes,
and that's free too. And then if, people want, they can make a contribution, which they hope that they do. And
yes, yes.
I guess we look at it as the paper is free and accessible to everybody, including low-income people who can't afford it.
Mhm.
And we just hope that people, hope that they feel they get value from the paper and can make a contribution to help keep it free for others who can't afford it.
I know you said you had guidance when you were starting up from your friend out in Oak Park, but the reading I've done, particularly of the UNC, I think it's the Husband School of Journalism and all the work they've done in news deserts, there are apparently supportive organizations out there that are helping smaller papers and online media as well make the shift to not-for-profit status. How did you make that transition? Is this something you planned on for a long time? And how are you feeling about it now? You think it's going to be, the roundtable still going to be here in 20 years, I guess, is what I'm asking.
We hope so.
Yeah, definitely.
I think we thought about it for, I'd say off and on for a year. We knew a lot of papers were doing it, and we thought it's maybe something that had to be done. There's other organizations, the Institute for Nonprofit News, which the Roundtable is now a member of, provide support and guidance on that. And the News Match, which is an organization that helps match donations that are made, I think in November and December of this year, if we're accepted and the Roundtable was accepted into that. They match donations up to a certain dollar limit. So there are, some helps on it, and it's a tough.
It seems like
it's a
the
tough
business is going, there are a couple of different directions. The model
Yeah.
that you're using, the not-for-profit, is one, which I think is probably good for a lot of community papers. And then there's what's happening to the Chicago Tribune, which has been, a hedge fund buys you out and bleeds you, and you're not a newspaper anymore. So
Yeah.
Are you worried about what's going to happen to the larger metropolitan papers, with the notable exception of, say, the New York Times, the Washington Post, and now the LA Times? They've got an Angel.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
It's you look at it, I'm thankful for the New York Times and the Washington Post, which, I do read every day online. And the Chicago Tribune's news, I think, has gone down in the last year or so. It's also very expensive to get a subscription to it. I think it was $750 last, we looked, and, it's just out of,
Hardly worth it.
Who can afford it, I guess, at this point.
Yes.
So it's, so it's a real concern, and I don't know where it'll go. Yeah.
Well, I think it'll be interesting too to see what the Sun-Times WBEZ partnership will turn out to be. So there's opportunity to change, and to see what happens. There's been some talk that perhaps the government should just fund newspapers no matter what, fund media with no strings attached. And I think that there's some advantage in that too. You just
How can a
want them to
government
fund
fund
legitimate.
anything with no strings attached?
I'm sorry.
Really? How can a government fund anything with no strings attached?
This is pie in the sky we're talking about. This is not real. But of course, you know, that's one reason some people don't want to take government money.
Yeah. There are a couple of questions in the chat. Betty, you're monitoring that, right? We'll get to them. I'd like to shift now in the time we have left to your observations and concerns about Evanston. And we've heard some of that, particularly in the work that reporting, Larry, that you've done with schools. But in the course of your more than 2 decades looking at this town and covering the news, what did you learn about Evanston that you didn't know before?
Well, an awful lot. I think, I always thought that people here were pretty smart and thoughtful. But one thing that I learned covering the Utilities Commission was that there are some real geniuses here who are thinking so far ahead. They're thinking of ways to address problems that other people haven't even acknowledged yet. So I think I learned a lot about that. I think I learned a lot. I think I'm a better listener than I was. I think I learned that more specific things. Of course, I learned about parliamentary procedure, and I think I learned a little bit more about what to listen for. You know, sometimes a meeting is over before people are willing to quit talking. So, you know, sorting out some of the wheat from the chaff. I think I got a little better at that.
Good, Larry?
I think I noticed sort of early on that Evanston's prone to have committees pop up for just about anything. And the unusual thing about them is that as they go on, you know, raising issues or advocating against an issue that's being proposed by city council or the school boards, particularly the city council, I think the citizenry oftentimes ends up giving more credence to what the committee says, and they get treated as though they know more than city council. And it's like a fifth state going on. It's that they have as much power and control as the elected officials. But that seems to have repeated itself over and over again in just a lot of issues. But it's one of the dynamics of Evanston, I think.
Yeah.
I think
Go ahead, Mary.
I think you used to call it the ad hoc committee against whatever. I think that was the generic name we had for it.
Paul, I forget his last name. He was a political scientist at, I think, Governor's State. He's no longer with us. He did a lot of commentary on local governments and city of Chicago politics. And I was at a program once, and I wanted to ask him a question. And so I raised my hand, and you were supposed to say your name and where you were from. And I said, I'm Helen from Evanston. He said, oh, the People's Republic of Evanston. I'm sure we've all heard that phrase. But I think some of us are concerned and have observed, how can I put this, a decline in the level and civility in public discourse. Is that your observation, and do you see causes for it, or how it might be addressed? Do you feel that the voices that are the loudest in town are the most representative of the community as a whole, or is it oh, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. And the rest of us need to get squeakier if we want to address some of this.
You want to start, Larry?
I think civil discourse has gone down, and it's been going down for a while. I think President Trump, helped drag it down with his racist comments and constant lies and, just about everything he does. But, he's been a role model for many people and many have followed it. Social media has provided a platform that, just enables people to really attack others viciously with, at times, just outright lies, just with rumors. And it's happened a lot in elections in Evanston. It's happened on, school issues. I guess one example is opening the schools. Should they be open or not? And it spawned vicious attacks from both sides. So it's something that's there. I don't know how with social media the way it is, with people like Trump out there leading the charge toward uncivil discourse. I'm not sure how it stops and how you get back to, just pure civility across the board. I think it's, as long as social media is out there, I think it's here to stay.
I do think too, that with the people that have been elected, I think that it's really incumbent on the presidents of the school boards, the superintendents, the mayor, and the city council to make an effort to keep the tone civil. I mean, I think that I agree, there's a lot of ugliness out there and people feel unleashed a bit, but I think that there's a need to have it controlled, and there are people who've been elected or appointed who need to maybe be a little more aggressive or assertive in setting a better tone instead of just reacting.
If you were going to be mayor for a day, what would your state of the, I'm sorry, we didn't talk about this before, but it just occurred to me. What would your state of the city address hone in on?
Larry, you go first.
You've covered the city more than I. I'll let you do it.
I would say that there's a lot of distrust. Starting with the negatives, I'll start with the negatives and then maybe end up with something more positive. But I think that I would start with, there's a distrust of many people in the community of city government and the elected and appointed officials and the hired, the main city staff. And I think that there's a distrust in city council and at the city level of the residents. I think it's a very mutual distrust. If people have been following the problems with the discussions of the proposed fifth ward TIF, you can see that there's a distrust on both sides. And I think Council Member Bobby Burns put it, really straight. There's a problem of trust. So I think that that's one thing that I would say the state of the city is mistrustful or distrustful. But I also think the state of the city is hopeful in that Evanstonians really don't give up. We're tenacious, and I think people are very committed to looking for a solution. I think that one thing that has bothered me, and probably several of you, is this idea of being a virtuous victim. And if people have the victim mentality, they don't really go any farther. But you've noticed that people are no longer called victims of domestic violence, they're survivors. And people are now putting more of an emphasis on resilience. And I think that's very hopeful. And that's the state of the city. So
Larry?
your turn, Larry.
I think if I looked at District 65, they have so many programs going on right now. Big programs such as possibly redrawing attendance areas, closing one or more schools, building a fifth ward school, addressing projected deficits, developing a new strategic plan. And I think all of those are very time consuming. They're all major things, any one of which could, take everyone's attention for a full year. And we've got 5 or 6 of them going at one time. And I worry about student achievement, which I think is the primary purpose of education in the school district, is to educate our kids so that they have an opportunity in life. And as I mentioned before, there's been no publication of the test results that have come out to show how much learning loss there has been due to COVID. And, it's difficult to measure. And, I appreciate that, the test might not be valid because some are taken at home, some are taken at school, and you don't have 100% of the kids being tested, but it's still, I think we have to start somewhere and have some understanding of, how this is impacting kids and try to really address their needs. It's concerning that there's been 2 protests by the teachers in the last 2 board meetings. And it's raises a concern about, how well things are going on in the classroom and whether the teachers are getting the necessary supports they need.
Hard to solve problems when you can't even have civil discourse amongst elected officials. I think that's a concern that we all have. One opportunity, I'm trying to remember now what the figure is. It's in the millions of dollars, 20-some, 30-some million that's coming to the city in the ARPA funds, the rescue plan. I don't know what the school districts are getting. Is that an opportunity for the community to kind of coalesce around something? Wow, we're getting this money. We can, do things with it. What can we agree on? Or am I a Pollyanna?
Well, District 65 is getting about $11 million in, we call it ESSER funds, which is the federal funds being allocated due to the pandemic. It spent, I think, maybe 2 to 2.5 million of that in the last fiscal year. 7 million is allocated already to be spent this year, and it leaves only about $1 million left for next year. So it's all the funds are spoken for, and the same I think with ETHS. Their allocation was I think about $3.5 or $4 million, but it's
Not a lot.
all that money is spent, and a lot of it's spent on for 65. They've hired some temporary teachers, to come in, and tutors. I think 75 tutors to come in and teach in the afternoons, or 4 hours a day or so. And so it's being really spent to address learning loss due to COVID.
Yeah.
So it's, I think, going to a good purpose, but just
Hopefully that's something we could all agree on.
yeah.
Betty,
I think
there
this-
are a
Yeah,
couple
can I ask-
questions. Go ahead,
Can I
Mary, and
ask
then-
Larry to follow up on the District 65 issue and maybe speculate about the prospect of redrawing all the attendance districts and even reconfiguring the schools from K to 3 instead of K to 5, and included in that is the prospect of a fifth ward school, and whether you think this discussion can take place in Evanston in a civil way, given what a controversial topic school attendance districts and connections with schools is.
Yeah, I think all those things are on the table, and I think they have, I think the board's committed to try to, I guess, do attendance area lines more equitably, so that, white kids and black kids, also the black kids aren't overly burdened by busing, which I think they have been in a sense, by being bused at least to the three or four northern schools in northern Evanston. And I think that's one issue that they do plan to address, although there's been no discussion at a board meeting as to whether this is going to happen. But you get the feeling that based on what the committees are doing, the subcommittees, I think this is what they're looking at. One of the subcommittees is going to recommend, or has decided to recommend, at least on a preliminary basis, to establish a school in the 5th Ward. If that's done, it means redrawing boundary lines for a number of schools. It's probably put up a new school, you close the school, you're going to be redrawing at least 5 or 6 schools boundary lines, maybe more. So it's, all these things are on the table, and I have no idea, what's going to happen, really. I don't even want to
Stay
speculate.
tuned.
But
Mary, did you want to add something to that? And then I'm going to ask Betty to give us the questions that were in the chat.
Oh, please go ahead.
Okay, you're on, Betty.
Yeah, I thought Mary wanted to add something too, but actually, one question in the chat was, again, asking Larry to follow up to talk about the Google Analytics data that you get about visitors to the website and readers of the stories, and how you used to and how you think that the current management uses that data. Does it influence the choice of stories? Does it, how do you use it?
I can tell you how we used it. I think we reviewed the data. I did every day or other day to see which stories are being clicked on the most. And quite frankly, it did not necessarily influence our decisions as to whether to cover or not cover a story, because I think we viewed it as, I guess we decided what we thought the community should be educated on. And if a lot of people weren't clicking on a story that we viewed as important, it didn't mean we were not going to publish it, a similar story the next day or the next week. I guess we viewed it as this. We think this is an important story, and if 200 or 300 people read it, fine. If 1,000 do, better. But we're not going to cut out what we think is essential to inform the community on what the city is doing or the schools are doing.
Okay,
But of
thank
course, we
you.
want.
But was there another question, Betty? I thought there was another one in the chat.
I don't think so.
Well, I saw Karen Telser had posted. She wants to know how to find, how she can find out on your website if she's actually a member of the roundtable.
I don't know the answer to that. But we could have somebody email or something tomorrow.
Okay, all right. Karen Telser's question: how to make sure she's a member. Karen, you can be a member twice if you want. Okay, I want to give the two of you the opportunity for any closing thoughts, and also tell us what's on tap for you going forward. You're not really retiring. I think you're going on to some other projects. So anything you'd like to say in closing, and then tell us what's next for the Mary and Larry show.
I would like to say one more thing about city government that I find a little concerning, is that I think that there's not just a distrust of the residents, but a disrespect for them in some ways. There's, as you've probably heard, some people have, the previous council, I think more than this council, wanted to limit or get rid of citizen comment, public comment, which I think would be a mistake. But I think also the fact that they wanted to get rid of the ethics board, and many times the council does not give real respect to these citizen boards and commissions. The council, of course, has the right to do what they want, but sometimes I think they don't realize how much effort people put into if they volunteer on a board or a commission. And I find that a little disappointing. And I have heard, not confirmed that this has been said, but I think in the actions, there's a real movement to discourage volunteers. And I think that's, I think that's something that goes with the distrust that I feel that the community has as a city and the city has as a community. And
That's very worrisome in a town that really has made a, particularly League of Women Voters has done a lot of work on boards and commissions and their relevance and so forth. So that's kind of discouraging.
well, and I think one of the examples is the study that the league offered to the city council on compensation of elected officials, which
Exactly.
they ignored.
Mhm.
But just from my experience with the league when I was a member before we started the paper and our collaborations, you do things very thoroughly.
Mhm. By the way, Jennifer O'Neill, our co-president, had put into the chat thanking the roundtable for the partnerships we have had on candidate forums and so forth. So that's a good glue between a community group and a publication.
Yes, but for us.
Larry, any closing thoughts? Oh, and you've got to talk about what you're doing next.
Just get a closing thought anyway now, but I think the roundtable is historically run almost as I'd say a volunteer organization, and I think the nonprofit right now is operating that way too. But I think long term, I think people need to be paid some salaries. I don't think anybody's looking for any excessive salaries by any means, but I think to pay people a decent salary to attract them and to keep them is essential going forward, and to pay our journalists a little more going forward is essential too. So, I would ask people to sign up and become a member. And in some ways, if you just look at the numbers, if 5,000 people sign up and paid $50 a year, which is probably less than a subscription. But if that amount was done, I think the Roundtable would be a sustainable organization going forward and could survive for a number of years when, put together with maybe contributions from Northwestern and which they are making at this point, and, other groups. But I think it's doable and would ask people to take that into account.
I would agree. Yes.
Yes, please.
Well, one thing that some of us are working on is a history of Evanston, and that's occupying quite a bit of time. We hope it'll be about a 250 or 300 page book with some nice, interesting information and nice photos and things like that. And yes, we do use This is Evanston. The earliest This is Evanston I have is 1949. And I think that we're all learning a lot from that, and it'll take us a few months to get that done.
Wow. Great. Wonderful. Wonderful. Betty, any closing comments? We're almost at 8:30 here. Jennifer?
I just would echo Jennifer's comments of how much the league has appreciated the projects we've done in common with the Roundtable. And we see ourselves as a civic resource, and we certainly see the Roundtable as a very important civic resource. So we're very appreciative of that past achievement. And it's just been a pleasure to hear about some of the recollections from Larry and Mary.
Well, thank you
Great.
again for inviting us, and we do appreciate the partnerships we have with the league, and we trust they will continue.
Thank you much.
Wonderful. Well, I thank you all for your interest and staying with us. We started with 40-some people. We still have 35, so I take that as a good sign. And thanks again to the Gavins for all you have done in this community. That's a rare contribution, and thank yous and applause are coming in. So
Thank you.
best of
Thank
luck in
you.
your future endeavors.
Thank you.